Hello, welcome to the self-learning platform by Dr. Sushma Singh. Today we start Unit 12, B.R. Ambedkar. And our topic is B.R. Ambedkar's thought and ideas. Dr. Ambedkar's thought has many dimensions. There were very few issues that he left untouched. He formulated his opinion on many crucial questions that India was confronting during his times. His versatility is reflected in his social and political thought, economic ideas, law, and constitutionalism. And we are continuing with topic caste. Ambedkar's understanding of caste and caste system underwent certain significant changes over time. Initially, he identified the characteristics of caste as endogamy, superimposed on exogamy in a shared cultural milieu. He felt that evils such as sati, child marriage, and prohibition of widow remarriage were its inevitable outcomes. Once a caste closed its boundaries, other castes too followed suit. The Brahmins, closing themselves socially first, gave rise to castes. Ambedkar continued to emphasize the endogamous characteristic of caste but roped in other features such as division of labor, absence of inner dining, and principle of birth, which he had initially considered as integral to endogamy. He also found that caste name is important for the continued reproduction of caste. He argued that the caste as discrete entities have to be distinguished from caste system based on the principle of graded inequality. At the pinnacle of this system are the Brahmins. He argued that ranking on the basis of graded inequalities safeguards the stability of the system and ensures its continued reproduction, which simple inequality would not have permitted. The dissenting members are accommodated as another grade in the hierarchy of the deference and contempt that deeply marked the caste system. Ambedkar thought that caste is an essential feature of Hinduism. A few reformers may have denounced it, but for the vast majority of Hindus, breaking the codes of caste is a clear violation of deeply held beliefs. The principles governing Varna system and caste system are one and the same. Both of them uphold graded inequality and subscribe to the doctrine of birth rather than worth. Ambedkar argued for the annihilation of caste without which building community bonds and upholding freedom and equality becomes well nigh impossible. He suggested intercaste marriages and intercaste dining for the purpose, although the latter he considered it too feeble an exercise to constitute enduring bonds. He further argued that the Shastras which defend Varna Shram Dharma have to be abandoned as they justify and legitimize graded organization of society. He also felt that priesthood in Hinduism should be open to all the co-religionists on the basis of certified competence rather than on birth. At the same time, he thought this project is well nigh impossible to be carried out because what is to be renounced is believed to be religiously ordained. Now, the next topic is untouchability. Ambedkar distinguished the institution of untouchability from that of caste, although the former two is stamped by the same principle of graded inequality as the latter. Untouchability is not merely an extreme form of the caste degradation, but a qualitatively different one, as the system kept the untouchable outside the fold and made any social interaction with him polluting and deplorable. He argued that in spite of differences and cleavages, all untouchables share common disadvantages and meted out the same treatment by caste Hindus. They are condemned to ghettos on the outskirts of villages, are universally despised and kept away from human association. He did not subscribe to the position that untouchability has its basis in race. He saw it as a social institution defended by the ideology of Brahmanism. While he did not extensively probe the reasons for the origin of untouchability, in one instance he proposed a very imaginative thesis that untouchables were broken men living on the outskirts of village communities who, due to their refusal to give up Buddhism and beef-eating, came to be condemned as untouchables. Given the deep-seated beliefs and practices of untouchability prevailing in India, Ambedkar thought that no easy solution can be found for the Malays. Removal of untouchability required the transformation of the entire society, wherein respect and rights towards the other person becomes a way of life rather than a mere constitutional mechanism. Given the entrenched interests and prejudices revolving around the institution of untouchability, it was something too much to expect from entrenched groups. Therefore, he felt that the primary burden of emancipating themselves fell on the untouchables themselves, such as self help required not only struggles but also education and organization. Further, a constitutional democracy with preferences at various levels can help enormously in such an endeavor. Next topic is constitutional democracy. The major area of Ambedkar's work was on constitutional democracy. He was adept in different constitutions of the world, particularly those that provided an expansive notion of democracy. rule of law as a bond uniting people, and according equal participation of people in collective affairs was quite central to his imagination. He was deeply sensitive to the interface between law on one hand and customs and popular beliefs on the other. He, however, felt that customs may defend parochial interest and popular beliefs might be deeply caught in prejudices and may not uphold fairness. They may not be in tune with the demands of time, morality, and reason. But if law upholds freedom and democracy, then it could be placed at the service of common good, giving the long drawn prejudices and denial of justice in public culture. He thought that the role of the state based on law and democratic mandate is crucial. He envisaged a democracy informed by law and a law characterized by sensitivity to democracy. Law upheld reason and morality, but without the authoritative injunctions of law, the former had no teeth. Such a stress on democracy and law made Ambedkar to strongly stress the autonomy of the state. State needs to transcend the parochial interest galore in society, which often tend to reduce the state as an instrument of their purpose. He argued that the scriptive majority, which are permanent and not amenable for political dissolution and reconstitution, too, can be considered as parochial interest. They can undermine rights but at the same time pretend that they are upholding constitutional democracy. Next topic is social justice and supportive policy. Ambedkar was the first major theoretician in India who argued that the consideration for the disadvantaged should be the constitutive basis of a state. If the state is committed to the upholding of rights, he developed a complex set of criteria to determine disadvantaged. Untouchability was only one of the great social disadvantages, also, although it was one of the most degrading and despicable one. He concentrated on socially endangered and disadvantaged not because he was unaware of natural and hereditary disadvantages, but he felt that most disadvantages are upheld by dominant social relations which attempt to convert them as natural disadvantages, foreclosing attention to them and absolving larger society from any responsibility towards them. He left behind a system of safeguards for the disadvantaged in general and the untouchables in particular. He thought that a set of positive measures are a better guarantee than merely the moral conscience of society, although the latter is a prerequisite to sustain such measures in the longer run. With regard to a system of safeguards, he advanced three types of measures. Although all these three types of measures were not seen by him as appropriate to all the disadvantaged groups and equally so, their appropriateness is something to be worked out in response to the concrete conditions of the concerned group. He demanded an autonomous political representation to the disadvantaged groups, not merely to ensure their political presence, but to ensure that the concerned groups undertake their pursuits of development, preservation, or reproduction, as the case may be, by themselves. He envisaged definitive constitutional measures for the purpose, rather than merely rely on public conscience. He argued that such representation will enable these groups to take into account the larger and the common issues into account and pitch their specific demands accordingly. He sought reservation for the disadvantaged groups in public employment to the extent they fulfill the requirement for such employment. He felt that they would be inevitably marginalized if such support was not legally extended to them. He sought extensive supportive policy measures towards these groups so as to extend to them the benefits of various developmental and welfare measures that a state undertakes. Ambedkar saw preferential measures as resting on an inclusive conception of rights rather than merely the goodwill or benevolence of the majority. In fact, goodwill itself needs to be cultivated with an awareness of such rights. In the absence of such civilization, goodwill and benevolence often collapse into narrow pursuit of interest, masquerading themselves in the language of altruism. Now let us have a look at the summary of the unit. Ambedkar had often been portrayed as a leader who upheld the partisan cause of the untouchables. He was, of course, partisan, and he upheld the cause of the untouchables as the most disadvantaged and revealed segment of Indian society. But such partisanship and advocacy were grounded on a body of thought and ideas, built on defensible arguments which he variably and effectively deployed. He critically engaged with the ideas and ideologies in place in the world of his times and attempted to devise his own valuations and judgments on them. He did not cave into their popularity and preeminence. He had a place for religion in the private domain as well as in the moral life of societies, but such a place was grounded in good reason. An inclusive conception of rights and an assertion of this world was central to his understanding of public life. He was an ardent votary of democracy, but democracy cannot be confined to a mode of rule, but needs to become a way of life. He was a trenchant critic of the caste system and untouchability and strove hard to put an end to them. He saw social justice as an essential attribute of a good polity and suggested concrete measures for the same. His ideas mark him as different from his contemporary thinkers, and today we regard him and he is much relevant to us for being so much different from others. Now we want to wind up this lecture and we have come to the end of the unit. Thank you so much for your attention.